Many Crimeans call that day the Anxious Wednesday. Everyone clearly saw how young men with athletic builds were being bussed into the peninsula from Krasnodar Krai. It was these people, armed with tricolor flags, who pretended to be pro Russian residents of Crimea. However, this was far from a harmless crowd, so women were asked not to go to the square that day and to wait for their men at home. As a result of the crush and clashes near the parliament building, 2 people died and dozens were injured, but the session that the Kremlin authorities were counting on was disrupted. And the very next day, armed Russian soldiers without insignia seized the parliament and government buildings of Crimea. These events marked the actual beginning of the occupation of the peninsula.
We didn't know that even at that time, those little green men were already in the basement of the Supreme Council, and that everything was already being prepared for the takeover from the night of the 26th to the 27th. But of course, it was a terrifying morning, the 27th, when you wake up to a call from your neighbor who was told not to go to work. The entire downtown center of Simferopol was all of a sudden completely blocked off, and no one really understood what was happening because absolutely nobody went to work on that day. Everyone was asked to stay home. The center was completely blocked off, and it was just a shock to us that some people had seized the main administrative buildings and raised their tricolor flags.
After that, events unfolded rapidly. The Crimean deputies voted to hold a referendum and dismiss the government. Regular Russian military units seized the TV center, the ferry crossing, the airports in Simferopol and Belbek, and blocked Ukrainian military bases. On March 16th, an illegitimate so called All Crimean referendum was held, and already on March 18th, a document was signed in Moscow about the supposed acceptance of Crimea and Sevastopol into the Russian Federation. The international community condemned Russia's actions and even imposed sanctions on several Russian officials and military personnel, but this was clearly not enough. At that time, many European countries, especially Germany, were heavily dependent on Russian gas and oil supplies, and some feared that active intervention could lead to a bigger war in Europe, saying it was better not to anger Putin. In those days, the Washington Post published a prophetic article by the respected columnist Charles Krauthammer. He warned that the dictator's appetite would not be limited to Crimea alone, that the West's actions would be seen as weakness, and that this could soon lead to terrible consequences.